Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I'm super excited to be. Awesome. Thank you. I'm super excited to be back here for Nerd Night, and thanks for the invitation. I feel really, really lucky to be here. So yeah, I'm going to talk about coral reefs, and a lot of this is from my book, Life on the Rocks, which just came out in April. Yep. And this kind of journey started, well, I grew up really, really landlocked in Missouri, even more landlocked than Austin. And I had never, when I grew up, I think we went on a beach vacation once or twice, but I had never looked underneath the surface of the ocean until my junior year of college. I went to Israel, and I was pretty miserable on this program I was on, and I was eating too many falafel. And so I walked past the sign on the side of a building, and it said marine ecology course, and I was like, yes, please. So I took off the little tag. It was back before you did emails, and they put us on a bus, and we drove through the desert, and we got off, and there were these big, huge, beautiful mountains and the sparkling water, and someone threw a snorkel at me and said, go, and I looked, and it was this incredible world full of coral and fish and life, and I was like, I live on the same planet as this, and I never knew it, and it was like a revelation. And I was like, I'm gonna be a marine biologist. And so I just said, that's what I'm gonna do. And like, my life did not go in a straight line, but I did eventually study marine biology. Not coral, though. Definitely not coral. It took me until I fell off the academic path and then started writing to get back to the world of coral. And when I did, I discovered that they were just as amazing as I had believed. And the coral reefs on our planet support about a quarter of all marine species. So that's maybe around 800,000 species. We don't know how many species live in the oceans, but it's an enormous amount of life. And because they support so many animals, they support us too. About between 500 million and 1 billion people depend on the coral reefs for their primary source of protein. And they're also the best. They absorb 97% of storm energy as it comes towards land. So a healthy coral reef is really important as our seas and our planet warms up. But what are these corals? I'm gonna have a little interactive part of this talk. And so I've written these limericks, and they're all about coral. And if you can say the last word, I do have a little prize to hand out, but I can only give one per limerick, so you have to raise your hand, and I will call on you. Okay, so here's the first one, and this is the question is, what is coral? So a coral starts life as a dollop, so small its form might collop. A furry tic-tac or a bite-sized knick-knack, which next turns into in the back of the room, yes. The answer is a polyp, and the present is a polyp. So they are little polyps that I have crocheted, and you can hang them. Okay, well, yeah, and you can hang them somewhere, anywhere you want, really. So here's what a polyp looks like. So coral are like basically little sea anemones that have clustered up together into a colony. But what really makes a polyp so powerful is this is the side of a polyp, and so these little beautiful kind of amber orbs are algae, and those algae photosynthesize as algae do, and they give 90% of the sugar they make through photosynthesis to the coral animal. And this is so much fuel that the coral can make stone. And so that's what the great reefs of our planet are. They're stones. And so, so that is the secret to coral. Okay, but now there's a problem. We have another limerick. Okay. Coral reefs have outsized reach, as you have now heard me preach. Their prime fuel source is an algae, of course. whose departure means coral will, yes, bleach is the correct answer. Yes. So when coral are healthy, they have these little algae, which are symbolized by the little green orbs inside of them. But when they get stressed, we don't quite exactly understand why, but the algae leave the coral. And when they leave the coral, they take their color. They also take all that sugar. The coral look white, and a bleached coral reef looks like this. And if the coral stays bleached for too long, it will die. It will starve to death. And so we have another limerick. It's still mysterious exactly why bleached coral's algae goes bye-bye. But one thing we know, and measurements show, the sea's temperature's gotten too, yes, high is the correct answer. So this is the only graph. So on the bottom we have 1975 to 2020, and the black line shows the ocean's increasing temperature, and it's increased by about 1 degree. And then these red lines show periods where we've had mass coral bleaching. So these are huge areas, like huge swaths of the ocean where the coral have bleached. And you can see that we really never had them before the 1980s. And then there was one pretty big bleaching in the 90s, in the late 90s. But then since about 2010, we've been in a period of chronic bleaching. And the IPCC says that about half the coral reefs on our planet have already died. And if we don't get climate change under control, by 2050, only 1% are expected to be alive. But my book is not just about this really dismal story, which it is dismal. I also wanted to go around the world and see places where people were doing things to help the coral. So the first place I went was Indonesia, and while climate change isn't quite an issue there yet, they have another problem. Okay, when folks try to fish too fast, the system's not going to last. Yet with some care, the coral repair, bomb fishing is never a... Yes? Blast is the correct word. So, so that was a tough one. Okay, so this is what a blasted coral reef looks like, and, oh, sorry, yes, thank you. This is what a blasted coral reef looks like, and unfortunately, it happens around the world, and in Indonesia, this is a problem. The coral here will not recover. This is a 30-year-old blast site. But strangely enough, the Mars Candy Bar Company has a chocolate factory on this, near this part of Indonesia. And they have decided to see what they can do to bring back the coral. And so, and I guess I can point out, so here's where we are. This is the Philippines, this is Indonesia, this is Papua New Guinea. This triangle is called the Coral Triangle. And it's the site of the most coral diversity in the world, like 600 species live there. And that's kind of in comparison to the Caribbean, where there's about 60 species. So they're working in a place where there's a lot of diversity. And they have actually developed these little, it seems very simple, but they're called reef stars. And so the people who build boats can make these out of rebar and boat resin and sand. And then the fishermen put broken pieces of coral fragments, they're called fragments of opportunity, on these reef stars. And then they can kind of network them together into like a galaxy. And then 18 months later, the coral blast site recovers, and you can just see sort of the central star. And then 3 years later, the coral reef has a ton of resilience, and it can really come back to life. So there's some positive stories out there. The other place I really, oh wait, okay. I have another limerick. There's another thing that people are doing. Okay. For a coral that feels like Don Juan, there's no app to swipe right on. The summer moon is a romantic tune when a coral is ready to, in the way back, spawn is the answer. That's right. Okay. Yeah, so in the Caribbean, the coral situation is pretty bad, so they're actually trying to increase genetic diversity by increasing numbers of spawners. And this is a coral spawning. Coral can't like get up and walk over to like flirt with someone. So they actually use the light of the moon and the temperature of the water, and they time their spawning so that each species has sort of like a half an hour window in August, like 3 days after the full moon, 2 hours after sunset, when they release their gametes into the water, in hopes that, you know, they meet an egg or a sperm of the same species. And it's quite an amazing thing, the timing of it. So in the Caribbean, people are collecting all this spawn and doing like these massive in vitro fertilizations. These are actually, this terrible picture, but these are little larvae, and they are creating different kinds of structures for them to settle down on and grow baby coral, and then letting them grow in these coral kindergartens until they're big enough to survive when they're put back on the reef. The Great Barrier Reef is doing one more really interesting thing. They had never had a mass bleaching until 2016, when you can see here, this is the northeastern corner of Australia. And the dots here are the Great Barrier Reef. It stretches as long as Italy. And there's 3,000 reefs. They had never had a bleaching until 2016, when the northern part of the reef bleached. And then in 2017, the middle of it bleached, and then the government was like, we better do something. So they invested $44 million, which is more than anyone has ever given to coral reef research. And one of the ideas they came up with is this idea called cloud brightening. And what cloud brightening is adding sea salt, so taking salt water, creating aerosols, and letting the sea salt go up to the clouds, where it acts as nucleators for water droplets. And so it's basically adding glitter to the clouds, and more solar radiation gets reflected to outer space, and you can end up having local cooling underneath those clouds of about 2 degrees, which is exactly what you need to keep coral from bleaching. So I got invited to go to see the very first demonstration project of cloud brightening in 2020. In March of 2020. So I was super excited, but I was also really nervous. And this is another storyline from my book, which is that the whole time I was researching coral, my daughter, who was 14 when I started the book, was becoming sicker and sicker. Initially, she stopped doing her homework, and then she stopped taking tests, and eventually she stopped hanging out with her friends. And we were trying to figure out what was going on. It turns out it was a very severe case of obsessive compulsive disorder. And so by the beginning of 2020, she had asked us, she had decided, and we agreed with her, she was so sick that there was no therapy here in Austin that could help her, and she needed to go to a mental health hospital, residential one. And there's only 36 beds in the United States for adolescent severe OCD. And she was admitted to one of those beds in Wisconsin. Her admission date was March 17th. So the idea was we were going to take her to Wisconsin. I was going to leave for Australia and go on this cruise. But as we all know, everything fell apart. So what happened was my husband and I and my daughter all got in the car, and we ended up driving her to Wisconsin 1,000 miles to make sure she could get admitted to this hospital and get the help she needed. It turned out in Australia, the people who were doing this research cruise had also gotten in their trucks and vans and bubbled up against COVID and driven 1,000 miles to the north part of Australia, to the Barrier Reef, so that they could get out. And they did this cloud brightening experiment, and it was more successful than expected. Our experiment with my daughter, if you call it that, was also extremely successful. She stayed in Wisconsin for 3 months, and I think it saved her life. But in the quiet, in between the time, when COVID started and she was gone and I couldn't go to Australia, I started thinking about all the similarities between coral and mental health, and the parallels became really, really profound. what I understood was that coral are so foundational to our oceans. Similarly, mental health is so foundational to our life. Without our mental health, everything else falls apart. And these two things are also extremely invisible. We are terrestrial creatures, and we don't think about the oceans very often. Similarly, we can look at a person and not see the suffering going on beneath the surface. And then lastly, what my daughter taught me was that there are tools that can help you improve your mental health. There's no silver bullet, though. And similarly with coral, there's no silver bullet. These things both take a lot of time, a lot of energy, and constant vigilance. And so I wrote these stories together, and I sent it to my editor, and I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "I think it's some of the most powerful writing you've done." So with my daughter's approval, it all ended up in this book, Life on the Rocks. Okay. So here's the limerick. Coral are indeed sensational, with symmetry nicely rotational, and mental health serves to support our reserves, for both are truly. Yes? That's good. Or foundational. I'll take it. So ultimately, this is a story about climate change. And right now, there are talks going on in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, on the edge of one of the most healthy coral reefs that exists on our planet in the Red Sea. I don't have high hopes, but hopefully the people who are making those decisions will realize that what they decide is the coral reefs that are right outside their doors, life depends on it. And here's the last limerick. For me, it's a true paradox that our climate remains just in talks. So we must explore how to restore. It's what you do when life's on the over here. Rocks, yes. So thank you, guys. Okay. I think I went a little long, so.
No, actually. Okay. Your countdown. You were good. Oh, wait, who got the last polyp? There we go. All right, thank you so much, Julie. We're gonna do some Q&A now. All right, so we'll pick a person, and then I'll run the microphone over to them, and then I'll run it back to you, because we have one mic. Jacob, I want 2 mics. Who has the first question? Come on, there we go. Oh, Jacob, please.
I just wanted to say sorry, the microphones, that's not on me, I'm sorry, but I'll do better. No, I am curious though, because I've heard for so many years, like, it's bad if the reefs die, and I understand that, but like, what are some things that will happen if we don't have reefs anymore? Like, I know they're beautiful and I know they support life, but like, what's the next thing that's going to happen, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing?
So, like I said, somewhere around 800,000 species depend on the coral reefs at some point in their life. So if among those 800,000 species don't have a place to grow up or live, you can have catastrophic implosion of marine ecosystems around the planet, which then affects the birds, which then affects us on land. So, I mean, I think that it's the first humongous domino in an effect that we just don't want to have happen on our planet. Yeah, I mean, I can't envision a world where that happens, and it's too terrifying for me. Yes.
Wait, who's? Okay. Gotcha. Pick the next person. Okay.
Yeah, similar question. So, like, further back in geological time when the Earth was warmer, what was coral doing? Was it, like, further away from the equator or, like, more heat tolerant?
So there were coral prior to the last like huge die-off, but they don't exist anymore. And they're called like horn coral. There are different species of corals. So it's thought that maybe the coral retreated into the deep sea and grew a lot slower. And then once the planet stabilized again, this new version of coral, which are maybe around 100 million years old, emerged back up into the tropicals. And hopefully there's not a geologist here who can correct me, because the paleontology piece is the part I have to like look back and remember. But yeah, I mean, corals have their ancient history in the probably Precambrian, 550 million years ago. But the modern corals that we have today are maybe 100 million years old. In the way back. Sorry.
Yellow shirt.
Hi, can you elaborate a little bit on the steps that the scientists in Australia took to restore the coral reefs there?
Did you catch that? Did you get that?
Are you specifically talking about the cloud brightening? Yes. So the cloud brightening, so I think I can back up real quick to that picture. So basically, this is the boat here with the cloud brightener on it, and it kind of looks like just a snowmaking machine. And so it's taking seawater and aerosolizing it so that it's 1 micron in size. That's how small they want it to be. And when it's that size, it will float up into these low-lying marine clouds. And then the salt crystals act as nucleators, this way that like dust and pollen do for land-based clouds. And so you'll get little droplets of water forming around them. And that makes the clouds brighter. And so it reflects more of the solar radiation back to outer space, and you got a cooling underneath the cloud. Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I've talked to a polar scientist who told me that we could keep the temperature of our planet at 1.5 degrees. We could hit the targets just using cloud brightening. And it's an incredibly interesting technology, and no one's exploring it except the Australians.
Let's do one more question.
Okay, sure, over here.
So it seems like it's mostly a temperature thing that causes the bleaching. Is the coral migrating to cooler temperature water? Like, are new reefs forming while the old ones are bleaching? Or is it just limited by how difficult it is for it to reproduce?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the coral are migrating north and south. They're moving to more temperate waters. And there's hard coral now in South Carolina, and they're moving northward in Japan as well. It's well documented. But because they grow pretty slowly, their ability to kind of outrun climate change will probably be limited. But yes, they are moving. So, yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys.